Hello, everybody. I'm Cody Troyer.
And I'm Brent Gaisford.
And we are the Hugonauts. This episode, we are chatting with Ann Leckie, one of our favorite science fiction and fantasy authors. Very excited to chat with her. She wrote Ancillary Justice, one of our very favorite science fiction novels. The rest of that trilogy, obviously, and some other books that go in that universe, as well as The Raven's Tower, which is an excellent standalone fantasy novel. She's won Hugo, Nebula, Arthur C. Clarke, you name it, and deserves them, in my opinion. Has also found on her bio, worked as a waitress, a receptionist, a rodman on a land surveying crew, and a recording engineer, which I think is fun to include, and is from St. Louis. So we're very stoked to talk with Ann.
For sure. And do not forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode, where we'll be talking about Peter F. Hamilton's Great North Road, an awesome space opera with wormholes, big mystery, police procedural. There's so much happening. It's great. It's fun. We'll see you next time for that. But first, let's talk with Ann.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, Ann. We are huge fans of your work and very excited to talk with you.
Well, thanks for having me. This should be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Good, us too. So you really started writing after you had kids, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like, particularly at the beginning, as you were sort of starting on that new thing at such a, interesting time in life?
It was interesting. You're absolutely right. You must have kids. Do you have kids?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had actually tried writing, like when I was just out of college. I actually sold a story to True Confessions, which I don't think exists anymore. I think True Confessions is gone. They used to be like on every drugstore shelf. And I was like, well, maybe I can do this. But it was kind of tough. I was young. Writing, fortunately, is one of those things that it helps for you to be older, actually, have a little more experience. But when I was home with the kids, I had been working as a waitress, and there's no way that my wages were going to cover childcare. And so I stayed home. And that is so hard. I was not cut out for that. There are people who love and enjoy doing that, and I can only salute them. I felt after like a year or two of like not talking to adults all day, and like my brains were bleeding out my ears. And so at the time, that was around about when my kids were like 2 or 3, when NaNoWriMo was getting big, which has exploded and done horrible things. But at the time, it was super wonderful to just kind of sit down for a month and write 2,000 words a day or whatever, and it could be crap and it didn't matter. And I started on doing that, and my friends were like, this reads like it's a real book. And I was like, well, maybe I can be a writer. So I decided I was home and I needed to do something with my brain, and I was going to sit down and do this. It is challenging to do that with little kids. My daughter was going to, at the time, a Montessori preschool. My son was like a year old, and he stopped napping very quickly. I had gotten to where my husband was working nights, and so when it would be nap time, I would lay my son down in the bed next to his father, and I would go out to Starbucks and I would write for an hour and come back home. And I started coming back home and finding my like 1.5-year-old playing completely unsupervised in the living room. And I'd be like, oh, we can't do this anymore. And so I ended up taking him to a tiny little church basement preschool for just like 2 hours every morning so that I could write. That was really the only way to do it. I'll also
that's
say
great. You made the time for it, though.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, it's hard.
It was tough. It's pretty much the only way to do it. There's no way with toddlers that you're going to sit and concentrate on something that you're writing for hours. And I've always said to folks I've talked to who want to be writers or who are writers who have little kids to just kind of forgive yourself until they get into school, because that's just how that's going to be. It's really tough. And also, I'm not a good housekeeper to start with, but maybe give up on thinking you're going to keep the house perfectly clean, which hopefully with little kids, you've already given up on that. But some people don't. And if you're going to write, you kind of have to let other things go to have the time to write.
For sure. There's only time for so many things. Well,
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you made the time because you brought us so many amazing books that we love. Among them, Ancillary Justice and all that's followed in the Radch universe. Can you tell us about where that that book and that world sort of started for you, some of your inspiration, that kind of thing?
You know how, and it was before everybody had smartphones, you're like in line at the post office or the grocery store and you're bored. And so you start telling yourself stories. You make up little adventures. I discovered actually that not everybody does that, because I've said that to people and they look at me like, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, well, how do you deal with standing in line? And so it just got kind of more elaborate and bigger. And eventually it got so big that I was having continuity problems. And that's where I started thinking about characters who could be in more than one place at the same time. Just
that's
as
so interesting.
Trying to reconcile my silly adventure fantasy that I would have while I was waiting in line at the grocery store. And eventually it got really big and I was like, I wonder if I can actually use this, right? And sit down and write. And that's so when my first NaNoWriMo novel was set in that universe. It wasn't the novel I wanted to write, which was Ancillary Justice, because I was afraid I couldn't. And so I ended up writing sort of around the edges of Ancillary Justice for that first novel.
Okay. That's very interesting.
So a bit of a Secret Life of Walter Mitty.
Yes.
Beginning.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Does that mean Anander Mianai was the first character, sort of?
Anander Mianai was the first character who needed to be in more than one place at the same time.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. And what keeps you coming back? I mean, so much of your work is set there. Yeah. What keeps you coming back to it?
Well, part of it is I've already done a lot of construction, right? And I've left a lot of loose edges so that if I have a story idea and then I think, well, I can just hook it on to this existing thing and already have a whole bunch of background built, instead of building a whole bunch of background for a new thing. And so that's part of it. And I mean, I sort of, just because of the way I work, I guess, made it really easy to expand that way. I may or may not keep coming back to it, but at the same time, my readers seem to like it. And there's no reason not to keep coming back to it because I can do almost anything, just building off in the right direction.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, particularly at the beginning, when the first book came out, one of the things that everybody was talking about that was different about your universe and about the Radch was that they don't care about gender. They have no term for it, really, and it was just a really interesting way to make a society feel really different from ours. It was a simple thing that ended up having so many implications. Can you tell us about how you made that work in the books?
So I started off thinking that it would be nice and relaxing to write a future society that just didn't care about gender, where gender didn't matter. I wouldn't have to worry about it. The characters wouldn't have to worry about it. And that turned out to actually be really difficult to do. That first novel that I mentioned that I wrote for that first time I did NaNoWriMo, where I was writing around the edges of Ancillary Justice, I just assigned people binary genders, sort of what I thought was randomly. And afterwards, looking at it, I realized that I had actually given people sort of stereotypical characteristics based on whichever pronoun they had.
It's inside you.
Yeah. I'm like,
like all of us.
Yeah, exactly. That's I'm not pointing a finger at anybody. I saw it in myself right there. And I thought, but I just don't want it to be there. And so I tried writing a short story. Fortunately, it was never published, using all masculine pronouns. Everybody was he. And I tried doing, because I love Jack Vance, I did all these complicated footnotes. It was a lot of fun. But the story ended up reading just like any science fiction story. It didn't read like one where gender didn't matter. It just read like a story with a bunch of guys. Oh, just read like a story from the 50s or 60s. Right. Yeah. And I was like, well, that isn't what I'm after. And I knew, I don't mention him as often as I should in this context, and I should. I had read Samuel Delaney's Stars in My Pocket, like Pockets Like Grains of Sand, when I was in college. And I had not read The Left Hand of Darkness, but of course it's very famous for using he for everyone. And also fairly famous that later Le Guin went back and sort of reevaluated that and asked what would happen if she used she for everyone. And I thought, well, what happens if instead of using he for everybody, I use she for everybody? And the nice thing about writing is if you make a mistake, it's very easy to fix. Nobody gets injured. Nothing's permanently damaged. So I went back and I took the chapters that I'd written of Ancillary Justice and I made everyone she, no matter what. And at first I was like, this is very weird. And as I kept on going, I was like, it is very weird and I really like it. I really liked the way that it highlighted the fact that there was a default pronoun being used that didn't necessarily match. I think because he is literally, it's considered a default in English. Like if your English teacher was old-fashioned enough, they told you the masculine embraces the feminine and you can use masculine for everyone. And that's complete bullshit. But everyone used to get taught that. And it's kind of true in terms of when you're talking. If you say he for everybody, no one will notice it. But if you say she for everyone will notice it. And so that was really super interesting to me. And so I said, well, I'll just continue with it. And that's how I did that. I did it because I was trying to solve a problem. And because the effect I got when I tried it was really super interesting to me. Now, I could have used, and some people, this is a rightful criticism, that I could have used they, but I thought that when I have characters with multiple bodies, using they for a singular pronoun was really ambiguous in a way that was really difficult to control. And I was not comfortable with neopronouns. And figured readers wouldn't be comfortable with them either. That's changing. Readers are getting a lot more comfortable with neopronouns, which I'm very happy about. But when I was doing Ancillary Justice, just when I tried it, the result was just so cool to me that I just decided to go with it.
That's awesome. I mean, we love it too. Yeah, I think it achieves something really interesting and different. And similarly to, Left Hand of Darkness, in some ways, their society is not so different from ours, but you change one small thing and you get to really explore how much that changes. I feel the same way about what you did in Ancillary Justice. Such an interesting way to explore gender by sort of removing it and saying, hey, what would that be like? You were also one of the first to write a book that is told from the point of view of an artificial intelligence. Can you tell us about what it was like to try to write in the voice of Breck?
That was super interesting. And in some ways I cheated. I spent a lot of time thinking about how minds work, how people work, how emotions work. Because of course I wanted a narrator who a reader could sort of identify with, or who was making decisions sort of like the way we would make them so that it would make sense. And the more I thought about it, the more it seemed to me that emotions are very dependent on physical processes. It's hormones tripping things over, and then that would be like sort of hardware stuff. And then our cultural and personal history stuff interprets those physical sensations, right? And then makes a meaning out of them. And that's really important, but it starts with those physical sensations. And if your body isn't a human body, what emotions are you going to have to make decisions with, to give you impulses? And that bothered me for a while. And then I was like, no, but my intelligences have human bodies. So, and Breck in particular is cut off from the rest of herself. And has only a single human body. So I can use that. And so I felt like I was cheating to do that because I'm not entirely sure how to solve that problem in terms of fiction. If you ask me, this is a tangent, you won't get general artificial intelligence until you've solved that problem mechanically, because you can't get complicated responses to complicated inputs without something analogous to emotion. I
really like that thought. Otherwise, what's the point? Yeah. Why would you have any thoughts?
Well, and also, I mean, we don't we talk about, oh, we're rational and we make unemotional. Not one of us makes unemotional decisions. Emotions are there to make snap decisions about novel situations. And that's how we do that. And we don't do it by having a dictionary of every single possible thing that could happen and a dictionary of every possible responses. We don't have that. We just have the snap, boom, we have this coding, and it's changeable over time. So those were the things I was thinking about when I put together my artificial intelligent characters.
Yeah. Well, so that sort of makes sense. You can sort of start from Breck, but then you also, of course, have a bunch of sections, at least in the first book, where the Justice of Torrin is entirely united, and then a bunch of other sections that are sort of one-esque, where you've got many bodies. So were those sections harder to write then, because they are sort of more
Those
alien?
were very hard to write, actually. Those were what kept me. Remember, I said I didn't think I could write Ancillary Justice, so I wrote the nano novel around its edges. I didn't think I could write that character because I knew that it had to be from the first person. I don't know why. It just felt like it. And I didn't think I could do it. Like, how do you write from the first person from somebody who's in 17 places at once? And finally, when I decided I was going to do it, I was just like, okay, I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to say here and here and here and here and try and make it as clear as I can. And that seemed to work. But it was really tough because I had to be very careful to keep it clear what was happening where and why, and all the, make sure the reader was grounded in each of those spots and knew how it was all going together. It was tough.
Yeah. Well, I think you pulled it off.
Yep.
Yeah. It worked. And despite the high potential for confusion, you pulled it off. I don't think that, I don't think you lost any of your readers with in those sections. So yeah, it was impressive.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Absolutely. Continuing on about your work, specifically, something I feel like genre fiction writers have to pay attention to a lot, or at least like if they want to be good, I suppose, is the appropriate balance between creating novel and interesting ideas, but also not bogging down readers in endless descriptions of new things and new names, and it's striking that balance. And I think that's something that you do impeccably. And I'm wondering how conscious that is for you.
Extremely conscious, actually.
Okay.
I spent a lot of time when I was first writing short fiction trying to figure out how to do that sort of invisible exposition. I think Joe Walton calls it incluing. And I think that's sort of fetishized in the spec fic writer community. It's a cool technique. But like the first actual science fiction short story I wrote, I tried to do like no exposition that wasn't implied in the narrative. And it was very difficult to read for people who didn't know what was going on. And like I had one reader was like, this is really cool and I have no idea what happened. And finally, I sort of loosened up and started putting things in. And so I've become actually a big fan of a really cool info dump. But as you say, you have to be careful that it doesn't stop the flow. And so I've actually spent a fair amount of time thinking about how to do that. One of the good rule of thumb, by the way, an info dump is fine as long as it's funny, really cool, or incredibly beautifully written. And preferably at least 2 out of those 3. And you can get away with almost anything. But you do have to be careful about sort of the flow. I've also come to the conclusion that you don't need to front load information. That was a big problem when I first started out. And I've noticed that it's a problem in beginner manuscripts. Like real beginners, people who are just starting out, and they front load all the information they think you need. Like they have a big prologue with the whole history of the world. And I totally understand that impulse because first of all, you've made this beautiful thing and you want everyone to appreciate it. And secondly, you know how all those things depend on all that complicated information that you've put together. And you want the reader to see how complicated this is and how everything flows from what you've set up. But you actually don't need to tell the reader everything until they need to know it. Right? So as long as you can salt a few things in, and then you can just say, well, now it's important to know that actually ice never melts in this place. Just at the time that you need it. You don't need to spend 5 hours explaining the meteorology of whatever your location is, at the beginning of the story. Just, get along. And then when you're killing people with ice bullets or whatever it is, then you say it's important to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Said simply, write better. Good writing, right?
Yeah.
The knowing where to put things. You also write these big, fun space operas that do have a lot of drama, and there's power. There are a lot of power structures. You write a lot about politics, huge, galactic empire. But your protagonists are often people who are kind of fish out of water. They're not sure about their surroundings or about their identity. I just finished rereading Provenance, for example. Just these very human, real feeling characters who are figuring it out as they go. And I love that about your writing. And I'm wondering what draws you to that.
Well, I feel like we're all that character, right?
Yeah.
I mean, most of us are not the empire of the galaxy. Most of us are not people in a position to sort of decree anything or send armies marching. And yet we're living in a situation where there's armies marching left and right, and people are declaring crazy ass things from moment to moment. You don't even know. Like, here we are living in this world. And I think that a lot of adventure stories, for understandable reasons, and I enjoy these, have characters who the things they do affect the fate of nations, right? The fate of the universe, the fate of the world. You have all this power. And I totally understand wanting to read those stories. I enjoy them myself. But when I sit down to write for myself, I'm drawn to the people who are more in a position that I feel like I'm in, which is I'm doing my best in a really complicated world with a lot of crazy things happening. And what am I going to do? Right. Ingray in particular in Provenance, when I writing the trilogy was very intense. And when I came off it, I was like, I want to write something light, and I want to write something that's just much easier and kind of fun. And I thought, I want a character who she just thinks she can't do anything, that she's a lot better than she thinks she is. I want to write somebody with imposter syndrome who can do more than, who's in a bad situation, but actually can be very effective, not ultimately effective, but still can be very effective. And I know some readers, I've seen people complain that she cries too much and they think she's a drip and they don't like her. But
I love Ingray Oxgall.
Her hairpin's always falling out. And
yes,
that's definitely me. I've never been managed to keep a fancy clothes or fancy hairstyle going, because everything's coming untied and coming undone all the time. And I'm like, there's absolutely an honored place for the strong-jawed hero in science fiction. I think there should be a place for the people who are like, I don't even know what I'm doing, in science fiction.
Which is, I think, how you manage to create such compelling characters, is that they feel real, maybe automatically, because they're based after real people.
I try to do that. I try to make characters that feel real and kind of multidimensional. Once again, I love me a good cardboard character blowing the world up, right? But for me as a writer, I get bored writing them.
Yeah. That makes sense to me. Also, shout out to Tick Wazine. He's maybe my favorite character.
He was so much fun. I like Tick.
Yeah, me too. You also have a really good sense of how real political conspiracies work, and weaving them into your writing. I think you execute them very well. And why I say, real in capital letters or in quotes, is because so much conspiracy in fiction is really like, there's these ancient guys and they have the clue, but only they have the clue, and they've been keeping it from everyone. It's not stuff that really happens. The political conspiracies in your novels are more like real world ones. They're power shifts and certain people trying to take wealth from others. And I just find that fascinating about your writing, and I'm wondering what draws you to that.
That's an interesting question. And I think a lot of it is just kind of what I see in the world. The sort of Illuminati kind of thing is cool. Once again, I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm putting down any other kind of story, because I enjoy them.
Yeah.
They're fun.
No, of course.
But when I look around and I'm trying to build something, I'm going to steal things from the real world, right? As much as possible. I do it really blatantly in my fantasy. In the fantasy books, I take stuff from real Earth cultures and real Earth geography and real Earth meteorology, because I don't know how weather works, but I know if it works on this place this way, then I can just copy and paste that into my world, and it should work. So I really am just trying to imitate the kinds of things I actually see in the real world.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I see, I mean, I think it's even more true of fantasy, even goes typically even farther in the direction of the huge. And so that makes a lot of sense why like Raven's Tower feels more human than a lot of stuff to me. So I think you pull it off. Okay, this one's a little bit of a switch. I love Adjo Ando.
Adjo Ando, she's amazing.
Yes, Adjo Ando is amazing. Narrates all of your audiobooks, just the Radch stuff? It's all of them, right?
Yes, every single one of them. I have lucked out massively, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about that process. What's it like handing off? It sounds like you're a fan, so that's easy. As am I. I love her reading of your novels. What is it like emotionally, and what is it like procedurally, kind of handing your work off to somebody to perform?
So initially, the British. So there's actually a U.S. recording of Ancillary Justice that is not Adjo Ando. It's an actress named Celeste Chula. She has the most beautiful voice. I haven't listened to very much of any of my audiobooks of my stuff. I've read it. I can't. It's just so weird.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Yeah, I totally get it.
But I have a bunch of other of things that Adjo Ando has read on my phone. But and the company that hired Celeste Chula to do it actually set up a phone call with me to go over pronunciations for everything. And so they have all the pronunciations straight from my mouth. But that was only in the US. And then several months later, the British Orbit decided to release an audiobook, and they said, so we're thinking about these narrators. Who do you like best? And of course, I listened to the sample of Adjo Ando, and I was like, her. and then I couldn't believe that they actually got her. But nobody asked me about pronunciations. So the pronunciations that Adjo Ando uses, and this is not a criticism at all, I do not mean to, are her own ideas of the pronunciations. And some of them are very different from what I would have said. But I mean, I don't care. And I've had people say, well, how do you pronounce? And so it was actually kind of helpful, because I was able to come up with my official answer, which is, in Radch Space, there are a lot of different accents and dialects and different languages. And so however you say it is probably right somewhere. Oh,
that's great.
So
that's extremely interesting, especially with your books, though, that they wouldn't ask, because there's you have a lot of double vowels, triple vowels, like it's anyway.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It's interesting. Well, I've started listening to audiobooks at night before I go to sleep. And so they're all things that I'm already familiar with. Like, I don't know how many times I've listened to the Murderbot audiobooks, like 45 minutes at a time before I go to sleep.
Yep.
But I noticed, for instance, there's a reading of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, where it's very clear there's a couple of words. There's one in particular that's a word from Gaelic that the narrator clearly does not know how to pronounce, and he did not stop to ask anyone how to pronounce that word.
Yeah.
And I wince like I'm trying to go to sleep, and I wince every time I hear him say Sidhi instead of she. Like, well, it took 5 seconds. You're in the British Isles. Go ask somebody how to say that word. But and anyway, I don't mean to. I enjoy that reading. I don't want to say bad things about him, but I suspect that audiobook readers don't generally take a lot of time beforehand doing that.
Yeah.
For science fiction or fantasy, which, I mean, fine. But so that was a little odd when I discovered that she was saying the names very differently, so that, because our fans would come up and say Syverden or Anna Under Me Anna I, which is how she said Ananda Me and I.
Yeah.
And I couldn't even, I can say that easily now. When I first heard it, I was like, I can't even do that. And so that was super interesting, but her reading is so amazing. She's so amazing. Now I'm just like, yeah, read it. I feel completely confident that you're going to, knock it out of the park because you're Ajo Ando, you're incredible, So now it's really easy, but I can't listen to them. I just can't. It's just so weird. I just want to, stop. It's just so weird.
Can you read your own, like, have you done readings? Is that okay for you or still weird? Okay, that's okay.
That's absolutely fine. Okay. I think some of it is like the way that I would, you pitch your voice differently and you choose particular stresses in a sentence. And obviously the way that I pitch my voice throughout a sentence and the way that I'm going to stress things is going to be the way that is most natural to me. And so if I hear someone else read it and it's off, it's kind of strange.
Sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, and it's kind of like hearing your own voice. These days it doesn't bother me. But the first few times you hear your own voice off a tape recorder and you're like, what is that? Now it's nothing. I don't even think twice about it. But there's something odd about that. And I don't know what it is. It's pretty common though, I think.
Yeah, no, it's definitely common. And I think multiplied by the, most creators don't love to, there's usually a period where you're really in love with the thing you've created. And then after a bit, you're sick of it and you like never want to see it again and you hate it.
By
and
the
then
time
maybe
a book
you come
is
back to it.
published, by the time a book is published, you never want to see it again. You've read it so many times, you just want to cry. Yeah.
That makes total sense. So probably the handoff of the audiobook reading portion of it, maybe it's not so emotional for you. You're like, yeah, do whatever.
Yeah, it's super
right?
stress-free. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's good. That's nice. I also wanted to say, totally agree with you about mispronunciation of words in audiobooks, especially common ones. I remember a Jimble Gimbal scenario we had on a recent episode we were talking about, and I was like, stop doing that.
Somebody
they were saying
told
Jimble?
Jimble
They
for
were
like
saying
7
Jimble.
The first like 7 audiobooks of the Expanse series are Jimbles, and then before
I
like
wasn't
book
gonna
8,
call it out.
somebody told them and they switched to Gimbals. But yeah, a lot of Jimbles.
I mean, some things there are some words that I know I pronounce badly because I've only ever read them. And when I hear someone say them and I'm like, is that really how you pronounce that? Really? Boy, it never would have occurred to me to say Jimble, but they probably call it a GIF too instead of a GIF like I intended.
Yeah, it's a bit of a G scenario. You also have exonerated Brent from when we chatted about Ancillary Justice a while ago on one of our episodes. I kept saying, well, I think it's actually pronounced like this, and it was the Ando pronunciation. So Brent, you're right. You can pronounce it however you like.
You can pronounce it however you like. That's because actually linguistics is something I find super interesting. And I mean, I'm not an expert in it, but I really like thinking about the ways that people speak and the way the way people speak changes. And so one of the natural conclusions of that is there's obviously going to be a bunch of different pronunciations and dialects. Yeah.
No, that's a great point. All right, we have just a couple more here for you. This is a specific question that both of us came up with independently. Are we ever going to see inside of the Radch itself, into the Dyson sphere? I'm sure you get this a lot. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but we're curious.
I don't know.
Great answer.
That's exciting. I thought you were going to just say no.
I mean, if something comes up that would be cool to be set there, I might. Now I will tell you, you will never see the Presker on the page.
That
Never.
That makes a lot of sense to me, and having read translation state, it seemed even more obvious that we weren't going to see, and it made total sense why. I think you achieved that impeccably.
Well, it's one of those, like, did you used to watch the X-Files? They'd say, oh, there's a conspiracy. Oh, there's a thing. You don't know what it is. And then they'd try and explain it, and you'd be like, well, that's disappointing. Like, it can never be as cool as you suspect it is. And I learned my lesson from that. Yeah. And you're never going to be able to maintain the true alienness. Right. As soon as you meet it, and then I try and explain it in a way that you can see it. Because I know way more about the Presker than has ended up on the page. There's all kinds of things that I can work with. But cool. As soon as I lay them flat on the page, it'll be like, oh. Okay. Yeah, that's a great answer. We learned about the two most mysterious things about your universe that keep us coming back. Okay, this one is about the work of other people. What have you read recently that you've loved? I've read a bunch of stuff recently that I've loved. I read, and this is, I should have made a list because I always get asked this, and then my mind just goes completely blank when I'm asked. Of course. I read, and I'm currently listening to the audiobook 45 minutes at a time before I go to sleep, Robert Jackson Bennett's The Tainted Cup. Okay. Which I strongly recommend. Of course, his work is fabulous. And this is the beginning, I think, of a new series, and it's really cool. It's sort of a fantasy Nero Wolfe / Sherlock Holmes kind of a thing in a really cool fantasy universe. And I highly recommend it. Kirsten Hall's Asunder. She's had a couple of books out, and they've never been quite as popular as they should be. She has a really cool, odd imagination, and Asunder is really, really good. I loved this past year Saint of Bright Doors, which was just incredible. I have not read Rake's Fall yet. I do have it on my Kobo, but I have not started it. What else have I read? I know I've read things. Well, we put you on the spot. I'm sorry about that. That's okay. Like I said, I always know this question is coming, and I didn't prepare for it this time. Well, that's just fine. But can I catch you off guard with another quick one, which is, what are some of your favorites historically? Like, what got you inspired by writing? Perhaps some Le Guin, it sounds like, but just off the top of your head. Past. That would be Andre Norton at the top of the list. When I was starting about 7th grade, I read way more Andre Norton than could possibly be healthy for a single individual. Of course, she wrote more than a single individual you would think could. So she's actually been probably a huge influence on me. C.J. Cherryh is another one. In fact, there's stuff all through Ancillary Justice and the further books that are kind of deliberate sort of hat tips to her foreigner books. The
T,
I
right?
really, really love. The T is one of them. Yeah, the T is one of them. And then I just sort of doubled down on the T. There's a couple of names for things that are like yanked right out of the foreigner books, just as kind of a, yes, I took this from C.J. Cherryh. Jack Vance is amazing. Jack Vance is so incredible. When I first wrote that first novel, and I sent it to some folks at, I think it was Critters, and somebody said to me, I feel like I'm walking around in this universe and somebody's got their hands over my eyes. I can't see anything. Like, there's no visuals. And I was like, well, who do I go to learn to do visuals? I was like, Vance. Vance does the most amazing visuals, as well as just having these sort of a beautiful sort of semi-stilted sort of writing style that's just gorgeous when he leans into it. He doesn't always, or didn't always, rest his soul. I think those are probably the biggest biggest influences. But I read a lot. I read the things you would expect. I read Madeleine L'Engle and Susan Cooper and Lloyd Alexander and, all of those folks when I was a kid. And basically I just sort of haunted the science fiction shelves at my local library, which, yeah.
Great. So all of it.
All of it. Yeah, all of it. And this was in the
you.
70s when I was doing this, when I was reading all of this. And I read all kinds of amazing things. And at one point, I sort of snuck over into the adult section where I wasn't supposed to be, and was randomly pulling books off shelves. And I pulled off a book that was, it was the Holdfast series. It was Susie McKee-Travis. And it was one of the books in the Holdfast series. And I pulled it off the shelf and I read the summary and I was like, oh, horses and girls. It's just full of women and horses. And I'm 12 years old and I have hit pay dirt. And oh my God, I was not ready for that book. I was not ready for that book. I think it may have scarred me for life, but in a good way, probably. The society is all women and they reproduce by having sex with horses.
Oh, okay.
Some early smut.
It wasn't even necessarily smutty. It just was happening in the course of the book.
That's what it was.
And of course, they were all lesbians, which makes perfect sense. But I'm like 12 years old and I go to a Catholic school and I have led a very sheltered upbringing. And I was very confused by much of that book. But I also think actually it's not bad for a kid to read some things that they're not ready for yet.
Yeah, it's part of growing up.
For sure. Well, I have one question I'd love for you, to just learn a little bit about the how the publishing business actually works. So, of course, you personified AI in such an amazing way, and then Martha Wells with Murderbot has done that. Very different style, but similar idea, first-person narrative. And you blurb like almost all those books. I'm very curious.
I love those books.
Yeah, they're great. I mean, how could you not? But I'm very curious how that happened. Did the publisher reach out to you, when after she wrote the first one to try to get a blurb on the back, or how did your name end up on those books?
Are you all buds?
Yeah.
Well, now, sometimes people do send me things. I get random books in the mail or emails from editors saying, do you think you'd want to blurb this? And I don't, if I were 12 years old and I said, I'm working an occupation where I get tons of free books, I would have been, yes, I've wanted life. And now I don't have time to read them. Right. But I read what I can. But no, the Murderbot books in particular, I think I said something on a blog or on Tumblr or something, and the editor came and said, oh, can we put something on this? And that's how they got the I Love Murderbot, because I love Murderbot. And and that actually happens a fair amount. I've got a newsletter these days, and I'll say, "Oh, I read such and such, and I really liked it." And I'll sometimes get an email from the editor saying, "Can we put some words on the, because you like such and such a book?" Or people will send them to me, and if I get time, I'll read them. And if I really liked it, I'll say, "Yeah, here's a blurb." Although I have to admit, I'm really, really bad at saying why I like something. That's why the Murderbot blurb is just, I love Murderbot. If I really like a book, I'm like, this was really cool. Well, that's not what they're looking for. And so often I'll go and say, this was really cool. What do you want me to say about it? And the editor will come back and say, what if I say it's a tour de force of storytelling? And I'll think, yeah, okay. So sometimes the sentences don't sound like what I would say, but I don't approve them saying it if I didn't think it was true about the book. So
that's great.
Do you find that are you still surprised by that feeling of having people ask you to put your recommendations on books, or are you used to it, or does it excite you? How does it feel to be asked that?
It's a combination of I'm used to it now, and every now and then my daughter will say, how do you feel about that? And I'll say, that is really weird. It is so weird. But I'm also used to it.
Okay.
So
yeah.
My dog just got back from his spa.
You've earned it.
Found me.
Oh,
Cute.
Good boy.
Well, can you tell us about what you're working on next? We would love to hear.
So I have turned in my latest novel to my editor, and she is reading it. And so hopefully I'll get edits back soonish. I'm not sure how much to say about it because it's a little bit, it's something, in some ways it's kind of a departure from the stuff, but it is in the Radch universe.
Okay.
And what else can I say about it? It's set on a rogue planet that doesn't have a sun.
Ooh, okay.
That's spicy.
And that's probably all. I'm not sure how to sort of condense things. I guess I'm at the mercy of whoever's going to write the blurb at the publisher.
Those are good. Those are good teases. Do they have geothermal power? Can we ask more questions?
They do. Mm-hmm. It's almost entirely geothermal power. Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
That's extremely
I spent a fair amount of time
Good
trying
guess.
to think how to deal with that because I wanted a rogue planet for various reasons, and then I was like, but how do I make that work? You know what I read recently was Dark Eden by Chris Beckett, which I liked a lot. It won the Arthur C. Clarke at some point. And he's got a society set on a rogue planet. And I was like, oh, this is a very different solution to how to deal with the energy problems on a rogue planet. I mean, it's ultimately geothermal, but he handles it very differently from the way that I do. And that was super interesting.
That sounds really fun. We're hopefully that'll be so assuming editor likes it, not too many crazy edits, does that mean like a year or 2 years from now? What do you think? How far
we're talking 26.
26. Okay.
26. Okay.
Yeah.
That's really exciting. We are definitely looking forward to reading that. And we are so thankful you came and chatted with us. This is really fun. We love your work, and we feel honored to be able to chat with you.
Well, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right. Well, we hope you have a great week. We can't wait to see what happens next. And thanks again.
Thank you.